Welcome to the Masters of Product Marketing. Today, I am thrilled to be joined by April Dunford, an absolute legend. And that's all the introduction I will give her. April, over to you. Thank you so much for joining us.
Oh, hi, that's it. Oh, we're right into it. Hi. So I'm April. Thanks for coming out. We managed to get the tech working and stuff, which is always, makes me feel good. I'm just going to jump right into it, I guess. I'll give you a little bit of background on me, just in case you don't know who I am. So I spent 25 years of my career working as a head of marketing or a head of product at a series of 7 successful startups. 6 of those startups ended up being acquired. So through the course of acquisition, I ended up at 5 big global companies. The reason that's 5, not 6, because I had IBM twice. And across that, launching products into market became a specialty of mine. So across all the big companies and the startups, I launched maybe 16 products into market. And in the last 4 or 5 years, I've switched to being a consultant, and specifically my specialization is positioning. I work mainly with tech companies, mainly with tech startups, helping them really get clear on who loves their stuff and why. For this talk today, particularly because I've got the product marketers here, I thought I want to do a talk on positioning, obviously, because that's my jam. But specifically, I thought what we would talk about today is positioning, but particularly within the context of how do you position yourself against competitors in the market. So if we think about it, our products don't exist in a vacuum. They exist within the context of different alternatives, alternative ways of doing the thing that our product does. And interestingly, we bump into different kinds of alternatives at different places in the buyer journey. So you can think of it a bit like this. In a typical course of buying a product, first, there's the challenge for customers of how do you kind of narrow down the options? So, there's all these other people that do things that look like what I do. How do I make sure that I get on a short list? And so at that stage, you're kind of fighting against the hordes. The next competitor you've got to worry about is, even when a company makes a short list, generally there's a bbig competitor floating around. Sometimes the big competitor isn't directly competing with what you do, but you'll get companies say, you know what, do I really need purpose-built software for this? Maybe I can do it with my accounting package. Maybe I can do it with my ERP package. And so in those cases, you're fighting against the giant. And then lastly, we have the issue of even when we have managed to beat the hordes and we made it onto the short list, even when the customer has decided to go with us, we still have this issue of, in order for customers to buy our stuff and adopt our stuff, we need to fight against the status quo, or the ghost, which is the competitor that you cannot even see. So I'll talk a little bit about each of those, and I'll talk a little bit about how you use positioning to battle against each of these type of competitors. So the first one is the hordes. So like I said before, we've got competition, lots of competition. As marketers, you've probably seen this slide before. This is the marketing technology landscape. This is just one tiny corner of the software universe. Sometimes, and it's horrifying. Look at it. There's 7,000 products in there. How does a customer ever narrow down a short list when the market looks like this? Sometimes people come to me and they say, well, April, that's MarTech. That's the crowded space. Other spaces aren't that crowded. And that's actually not true. Like, here's sales technology, here's data and AI. Once I was speaking at a conference and a guy came up to me afterwards and he said, April, my market isn't actually all that crowded. I'm in the drone technology market. And I was like, oh, I bet you I could find one of these slides. And sure enough, there it is, the drone market. It's crowded too. So how do we actually make sure that customers can understand what we do, and we stand out from all the other ones there. And so the first way I think we do this is we make sure that we're only fighting where we can win. Now, that might sound kind of obvious. I like this quote from Warren Buffett where he says, how do you beat Bobby Fischer? You play him at any game but chess. A lot of us are essentially trying to play chess against the chess grandmaster. We are unintentionally positioned in a fight that we literally cannot win. I'm going to give you 2 examples of this. The first example is kind of goofy and stupid, and it doesn't have anything to do with tech. And then I'm going to give you the second example, which is a tech example. But the first one's good just for illustration. So let's say for a minute, we don't work in tech. What we are is I'm a baker, and my jam is chocolate cake. I'm really good at chocolate cake. And so I wake up on one morning and I say, you know what? This morning, I'm going to innovate the heck out of chocolate cake. That's what I'm going to do. And I come up with this idea specifically. What if we had chocolate cake that was more like a snack than dessert? And specifically, it could be portable. So I could walk down the street and I could drink coffee in one hand and have my chocolate cakey snack in the other hand. So I come up with this product. And I iterate on it. I get it into customers' hands, and eventually, what I come up with is this thing on this slide over here on the right-hand side. I've got this thing, and customers love it. They're crazy for it. I don't know what I'm going to call it yet, but they love this thing. And I decide, well, I'm ready to take this thing prime time now. I'm going to call the head of buying at Starbucks, and I'm going to sell her on my innovative chocolate cakey thing. So I call her up, and here's how I pitch it. Hey, Starbucks lady, I got this amazing thing. It's amazing. You know what it is? It's cake. But it's not just any kind of cake. It's innovative cake. It's innovative new cake. And so what I did was I took the cake and I made it a little bit smaller, kind of like a morsel of cake. And then I decided I was going to give it a handle. It's not really a handle. It's more like a stick. And then I got this amazing new innovative next generation cake on a stick thing. Do you think that pitch works with the lady at Starbucks? No, it doesn't. It doesn't. Why doesn't it? Because the Starbucks lady is going to be like, you know what? That's not cake. It's not. That's Franken cake. That's cake doing stuff cake was not meant to do. And why does she think that? Because right out of the bat, you positioned it as cake. What wins a cake contest? The cakiest cake in town. That's what. And how do I evaluate cake? Well, I evaluate cake like cake. I want a big piece. I don't want your tiny little piece. I want a great big piece. I want frosting. That is a key component of cake. You never even mentioned frosting. You got this pink stuff and the sprinkles. And why is there a stick there at all? Sticks do not belong on cake. Cake, stick, that does not go together. You set yourself up to fail because you positioned yourself against a thing that you cannot build. You cannot beat. What is innovative, new, and amazing about the thing that you invented? It's the ball and the stick and the sprinkles and the crazy colors. And all of that stuff is fundamentally not cake. So, positioning in a category determines how you get evaluated. If you do a bad job of it, you're going to get evaluated in a way that maybe you don't look so good. Now, look, in this case, I could have positioned this in a completely different way. So I could have said, you know what? Starbucks lady, I got to pitch you on this thing. You know what I was thinking about? What if we had a lollipop? A lollipop. Except it's a lollipop for grown-ups at the coffee shop. So what we did was we took this lollipop and we made it out of cake. Now that's different. That's different. I'm not expecting frosting on a lollipop. Does the stick and the ball and everything make sense? Of course it's got a stick and a ball and everything else. It's a freaking lollipop. That's what we know about lollipops. And if what I'm looking for is a lollipop for grown-ups at the coffee shop, Cake Pop wins. So my best market category takes my strengths and puts them right at the center of what my product is all about. Now, let me give you a tech example for this. So this is a company in Canada up here. They're called ClearPath Robotics, founded by a couple of guys with advanced degrees in mechatronics engineering. They start a company. They're robot guys. They're building robots. Specifically, what they build is a robot that drives around a manufacturing plant and it delivers things from one place to another. Now, if you're like me, you don't know too much about robotics, you might think, well, that doesn't sound like a very hard problem to solve. Turns out that is a very difficult problem to solve. And that thing that they invented is full of mapping and sensors and artificial intelligence and a whole bunch of other cool stuff. So they go to sell this thing. They get a meeting with the person in the manufacturing plant who's in charge of buying robots. And they walk in and they say, hello, we're ClearPath Robotics. We're here to sell you our fancy new robot. And the minute they say robot, people in the manufacturing plant are like, oh, robots. We got robots, man. We've been buying robots for decades. We got, you know what we have? We have approved robot vendors, and you're not one of them. We know what robots cost. You seem kind of expensive. And the problem is what they got in their mind is this thing on the left-hand side of this chart. It's that they're thinking about a thing that picks up a roll of tape and puts it in a cardboard box. And what do the ClearPath guys do? They go, no, you're wrong. No, you don't understand. They're special robots. They're amazing robots, revolutionary new tech robots like you've never seen before. So eventually they decide maybe positioning this thing as a robot isn't doing us any favors. So they took a step back and they said, what makes us special and different and amazing? And it's mobility, it's artificial intelligence, it's mapping, it's sensors. What drives around and is full of mapping and sensors and artificial intelligence? And they realized maybe what we have built is actually a self-driving car. Maybe what it is an autonomous vehicle for manufacturing uses. And they repositioned it that way. And then suddenly everything became so much easier for customers. Of course it drives around. Of course it's full of mapping and sensors and artificial intelligence. Of course it doesn't compete with a stupid thing that picks up a roll of tape and puts it in a box. What I love about this example too is that it shows how the positioning impacted everything, not just the way they talked about it. If you look at the industrial design of the vehicle itself, it has white headlights on the front and red brake lights on the back. Those do absolutely nothing. They're literally there to drive home this positioning of this thing is an autonomous vehicle. So how do we find our best market position? Let's define positioning first, because it is not a particularly well understood concept for people. So here's my definition. Positioning defines how our product is the best in the world at delivering some kind of value that a well-defined set of customers cares a lot about. Is that a big mouthful? Yeah, it is, actually. The reason it's a big mouthful is because positioning is actually composed of 5 component pieces. And the pieces are these. So first of all, positioning defines who exactly are my alternatives. If I didn't exist, what would customers do? Secondly, what are my unique attributes or features? What have I got that the alternatives don't have? Next, we've got the value. What can I deliver for customers that's valuable to them? Next, I've got my target customer segmentation. So who exactly am I selling this thing to? And then lastly, market category. Am I a robot or a self-driving car? You can think of it this way. Market category is the context that you position your product in that makes this value obvious to these folks. Now, how you actually do positioning is not intuitively obvious. Most companies start out with a kind of default positioning, much like my robot examples. We're robot guys and we're building robots. But if we really want to nail positioning, we need to do it deliberately, and we need to do it using a structured process. So I have one that I've used. It looks like this. It basically works through the 5 component pieces in a very specific order. So one of the things you notice about the 5 pieces is that each piece has a relationship to the other. If I pick any individual one, like let's pick value, the differentiated value that my product can deliver for customers is completely dependent on my differentiated features, right? But my features are only differentiated when I compare them to a competitor or an alternative. So those things are all related. My best fit customer segment are the people that care a lot about my value. So those things are related. Market category, like I can't really figure out my best market category until I understand what's the value that my product delivers and who's it for. Then I can pick it. So if you think about it in that way, you have to work through the component pieces in a very specific order. Otherwise, what you get is positioning that sounds kind of good. It just doesn't actually win in the marketplace. In my opinion, you have to do it this way. The starting point for this is competitive alternatives. Notice how I didn't say competitors. Competitors are different. Competitors are like, most of the time in B2B software, most of the time, our biggest competitor is actually Excel or hire an intern. So if I'm actually out there busily trying to position myself against the hot new startup down the block or some other big company in my space, but it turns out that actually my big competition is hire an intern to do it, your positioning is going to be pretty bad. So the way you got to do is first you got to understand if your product didn't exist, what would customers do? That's the starting point. And then you say, okay, maybe that's Excel, maybe that's other products. I don't know what it is. Pick it. And then you're like, okay, so now what do I have that they don't have? That's how I get unique characteristics. Then I can take that and say, for each of those features, so what for customers? How does that map to value? That gets me to differentiated value proposition. Once I have that, I can say, what are the characteristics of a target customer that makes them care a lot about my value? That's how I get to best fit customers. And then once I have that, I can say, okay, what is the best market to position this product in such that this value is obvious to these folks? Now, there's 1,000 ways you can screw this up. And if you want to go way, way, way down the rabbit hole on positioning, I wrote a book about positioning. You can go nuts on that. I'm going to get off this topic at this point, though, so I can get to the rest of this talk. So coming back to how you beat the hordes. Number one, you position in a fight you can win. You do that using a deliberate positioning methodology. Secondly, how do you beat the hordes? Number two, related to this, you teach your prospects how to buy, which might sound weird at first, but think about it this way. Most of us sell a solution that customers have never purchased before. I used to be in the CRM space where we sold customer relationship management. My buyers, nobody had ever bought a CRM before. So, buyer wakes up, they get the job. Someone says, hey, find us a new CRM. And they're like, I don't even know what makes a good CRM. I don't know how to evaluate CRMs. And I'm like, oh, this sounds hard. And then what happens? I Google around and I get a slide like this. And I'm like, terror. There's 7,000 things on here. This is not going to be helpful to me. And I keep Googling, and let's say what I'm actually looking for is software to help me train my sales reps. So I Google around and I figure out, that's actually called sales enablement software. Great. So sales enablement, that's good. Okay. So I narrow it down to the box. So that's good. I'm not looking at 9,000 things anymore, but it's still bad. Look at it. There's dozens in there. I'm not going to evaluate every single thing on this chart. Let's say I keep Googling and then I end up with something that looks like this. Lead generator site, G2 Crowd, software advice, one of those things. Does this help me buy? Seriously. Look at it. Like market presence, performance, whatever that means. So if let's say performance is, are my customers happy or not? And this is market presence. Well, what if I look at all those things in the leader quadrant? By the way, there's still a dozen in there, but I'm a small company and those things look like they're really expensive. And for big companies, I don't necessarily want the leader in the market. I want the right thing for me. What do I need to be paying attention to pick the right thing for me? And then, the laugh of these companies is, most of these companies, their business model is they profit from confusing the hell out of customers. That's their business model. They're not incented to help customers make a choice. They're incented to keep customers in the evaluation phase as long as possible. So they're creating a new chart every day. They got all kinds of weird categories that don't even exist. They're putting companies in categories where they don't belong. This is not helpful to customers, I don't believe. So who knows a lot about how a customer should make a decision about a product? You do. Vendors do. We do. We're sitting there looking at the market all day. And not only that, we have a point of view about what products are a good fit for customers in different situations. We do. It's biased though. So most of us don't communicate it because we're like, no customer wants to hear my biased point of view on what they should buy and what they shouldn't, right? Do they? Turns out, actually, they do. So if you look at the research on this, it's fascinating. The research shows when we ask enterprise buyers, what do they like the most in a sales experience? The top few things they like is they like it when a sales rep comes in and educates them about their choices in the market. They like it when a sales rep comes in and says, here's my point of view on what's good and what's bad. They like it when a sales rep comes in and says, here's how you avoid pitfalls and don't pick the wrong thing. So you're, yes, biased, but if you can keep it honest, point of view can actually be hugely helpful for prospects. How might you do that? So let's say you're in the sales enablement space. Let's say you're a vendor in here and you're like, look at all these things. How does customers ever figure this out? Here's an example of a company in that space that took this on and says, we're going to help customers figure out how to buy this stuff. So the company that put this together is called Level Jump. They're one customer on this chart. And so they did this cheeky piece of content that was called Sales Tech Explained Using Donuts. And so, the first one was some of those things that you'd see on that chart are actually sales intelligence. When would I use sales intelligence? It's when I want to know who likes the donuts. And here's the top 3 players there. What about sales engagement platforms? That's when I manage how I call, email, and in-mail people about the donuts. And here's who those are. And if you scroll down to where they are, they're sales readiness and enablement. I trained to become the master at selling donuts. And here they are, they're on there, plus their top 2 competitors. Now, they're not scared of doing this because they know they have clear differentiation with those 2 competitors. All they want to do is make sure they get on the short list. If they get on the short list, they're feeling pretty good that they can land a good proportion of those deals. Later on, they got lots of questions in the sales process about how does your software fit in relation to all the other software we have in our sales tech stack? So they created another piece of content that was like the map in a shopping mall. And they said, look, you're going to have conversational intelligence and sales engagement. Most of you guys have that already, and that's Salesloft and Gong and whatever. So you've got that. And then on top of that, you're going to build corporate learning. That's completely separate, and it looks like this, and that's where Lessonly and Pluralsight all sit. Salesforce has an offering there. And then on top of that, we've got sales readiness and we've got sales enablement, and that kind of splits into content management solutions and sales readiness. If what you want is sales readiness, that's the yellow stuff, and that's where we fit. Helpful to customers, popular with customers, content that looks like that. All right, so I beat the hordes. I figure out how to stand out from the hordes, and I do that by positioning deliberately and then helping customers, giving customers a way to think about the market so that I'm actually helping them buy. Now I got to go beat the giant. So no matter where we are, there's kind of a big guy in the market, big company that's been around. They look like they're safe. They look like they're amazing. It's often hard to compete against these folks, or at least it looks like it on the outside. But one of the things we have to keep in mind is that we can position other companies in our space in the same way we position ourselves. And so one of the best ways to position against a big market leader is you essentially use their strengths against them. So inside everything that you would normally think of as a real strength or a competitive advantage of a big company is a weakness, an inherent weakness. So when I worked at IBM, we spent a lot of time talking about how we were very proven and our stuff had been in the market for decades. And that's why you would want to choose us. The little startups would come in and say, legacy shit. And they would just toss us onto the legacy pile. Nobody wants to buy legacy software. That sounds bad. Once I worked at a startup where we did a very specialized thing in a niche of the market, and we positioned deliberately the big player in our market as being market leading, but they're market leading, but they're generic, they're unspecialized. Things like feature rich. At IBM, we very much prided ourselves on the fact that every one of these drop-down menus had 19,000 options you could choose from. We thought that was a good thing. We'd have startups come in and say, do you really need all that complexity? Gosh, that looks like it's hard to use. Trusted by many can mean slow to innovate. Here's an example of this in the sales tech space a few years back. I was doing some work with a company called D2L, Desire to Learn. Maybe somebody here is from there. They're one of the leaders in that space, a very mature product, lots of features, broad depth of functionality, and big company making a lot of revenue. This little startup came nipping at their heels that came up, and they basically had nothing. Like they didn't have the features, they didn't have the breadth of the product, they didn't have a lot of depth, but they did this really good job of kind of coming in and saying, hey, customers, like, do you really need all that functionality? And they used to use this imagery, and they say, we're like a sleek little Volkswagen Beetle. And, and everything's just just what you need, not too many extra things. It's sleek and easy to use and nice. And the other guys, they're like this, man. They're like a big old station wagon with crap hanging off of it all over the place. And you don't want that. That's terrible. So they take the strength and turn it into weakness. Here's the other way you beat the big guys is you just let them have the part of the market where you can't beat them, but you vigorously defend your own turf. So if you're competing with them, you don't necessarily have to beat them everywhere. In fact, you're not going to beat them everywhere. That's why they're big and you're small. But if you carve out the piece of the market where you absolutely do win, you basically just say, we're never, ever going to let them win here, but we're going to give them the rest of it. This helps build trust with customers as well, because if you're trying to go in there and pretend that you beat them everywhere, well, it's just not credible in it because it ain't true. I'll give you the example of this was I worked for a company in the enterprise CRM space. And this was years ago when Salesforce was still selling at the very bottom of the market. And enterprise CRM at the time was this giant company called Siebel, which was huge, like $2 billion revenue, 9,000 employees, big, the hundreds of customers, the undisputed leader in enterprise CRM. We were playing in a niche market where we were just for investment bankers. So when we went in to talk to investment bankers about what we did, we would, the first question they'd ask us is like, wait, do you guys compete with Siebel? And we'd say, oh, Siebel, we love them. They're amazing. What a company. So big, so smart, so much revenue. Oh my gosh, they're amazing. They're like the world's most best, greatest general purpose CRM for call centers in India and manufacturing plants and retail and stuff, and I don't know, but not you, Wolf of Wall Street. What you need is something very specialized. Your sales process doesn't look general purpose, does it? It's very, very special. We have a very special set of features that you need that the other guys don't have. Buy them for everything else. Don't buy them for investment banking. We made a lot of money doing that. All right, so here's the last competitor. So you've made it past the hordes. You've beat out the big one in your space. And now I'm to the ghost, which is status quo. And in a lot of ways, status quo is kind of the worst competitor. The data on this is actually terrifying. So there's the accepted data says that we lose about 20% of deals to status quo. And when I say lose, I mean, you got on a short list. You went all the way through a sales process. You got right down to make the decision. And the company said, we're just going to keep doing what we're doing right now. That's terrifying. There's this really interesting set of data that I pulled out where they went and did a long study of enterprise sales reps, and they asked them, what do you think customers are struggling with the most? And their top 3 challenges for buyers ranked like this. Number 1 was building a case for change, meaning why should we do anything different than what we're doing now? Number 2 was comparing their options, which is what we've just been talking about. They need a way to think about the market. And number 3 was combating the status quo. So again, it's just like number 1, how do we actually convince folks to do something different? So how we beat the ghost? And my opinion on this is we beat the ghost by aligning with whatever the customer's big priorities are right now. So often we have a product or our offering is compelling. It just doesn't happen to be on my top 3 list of things that I'm going to focus on right now and invest in right now. And so when that happens, what we'll often get is, let's just think about this next year. Maybe we'll make the purchase next year. We're not going to do it right now. It's just not a priority right now. So your challenge in this is, how do you draw a line between those top 1 or 2 priorities and make your stuff integral to that? I can give you 2 examples of this. One is, I love this company. They're called Sampler. I sit on the board. What Sampler sells is digital product sampling. That's the market that they're in. Right now, consumer packaged goods brands spend billions of dollars doing product sampling campaigns. So I'm coming out with a new cereal or a snack or something, and you'll see these people standing on the street corner, at least you did pre-corona, standing on the street corner, handing out samples of granola bars or chips. You see them in the grocery stores giving out samples of food to people in the aisles. What Sampler does is they give you a digital way of doing this. So they actually have a giant database of folks that want samples. They match them to people that are giving samples away, and then they collect all this data, or they deliver the samples to people in the mail, and then they collect all this data. You can survey them afterwards and find out, did they like the sample or did they not? Did they actually go and make a purchase or did they not? A lot of this data you can't get with traditional sampling programs. Anyway, Sampler's going along, they're doing good, they're growing pretty fast, they're kind of nifty little startup, and then Corona hits. And so when we first went into lockdown, consumer packaged goods brands froze completely. And so they're like, oh my God, sampling, it's dead. We actually can't sample anymore. We're not going to stand on a street corner and hand out samples of things. We literally can't be in grocery stores anymore. So we have to stop sampling completely. The Sampler looked at this and said, we actually have the solution for this. We have the solution for this. And so they essentially developed a point of view around contactless product sampling. And then they were in the market interviewing with press outlets and creating content and out there talking about contactless product sampling and the future of the beauty tester. Say goodbye to sampling lipstick in the drugstore. We're never going back to doing that again. And how do we actually do product sampling now that we can't physically stand in the places where people buy and distribute the samples? And so they had a perfect solution for that. So they're out there talking about that. All of a sudden, the thing that they were doing before, which was, yeah, it was a priority, maybe not that much, whatever, became a super high priority. And the sampler stuff just completely took off. And they managed to actually raise a big round of financing right in the early days of the pandemic, which was kind of amazing when nothing was happening. Here's another example of that. There's this company, Redgate Software. I worked with them a while back there in Cambridge in the UK. And what they do is database tools, database backup, database provisioning. It's not sexy, but they do a darn fine business doing it. They have 800,000 active customers, great big team, wildly profitable. What happened with them was a few years back when GDPR was first coming up, they noticed that some of their customers, when they were trying to sell, would say, you know what, this just isn't a priority right now. Next year we'll look at database tools, but right now we're all focused on a DevOps transformation. This is sometimes folks started doing this in response to GDPR. So they looked at that and said, well, DevOps transformation should include database tools. Why does it not? And so much like Sampler, they took a step back and developed a point of view around how databases fit and data fit into a DevOps transformation, and how can, and they put a name on it, which is database DevOps. And so same thing, they're in the press, they're at conferences, they're writing content, talking about DevOps for database, how to source control your databases for DevOps, why do you need it, how do you do it? The result of that was 100% increase in inbound leads. So their thing that before seemed kind of sleepy, all of a sudden seemed hot because they were aligned with something that was a key priority for their buyers. That's it. That's all I got. A recap. How do you beat the hordes? You got to position deliberately using a deliberate positioning process. How do you beat the giant? You can do that by turning their strengths into weaknesses. And then lastly, how do you beat the ghost or status quo is you make sure that the thing that you're doing is aligned with the key priorities of your buyers. That's my email address. If you want to send me an email, if you want to go to my website, it's there. I'm on Twitter. That's my Twitter handle. And we're gonna switch to questions. And I see some questions in the chat. So put your questions in the chat and we will get to them. And Max is here and he's going to help.
Yes, I am. Hello. Yeah, we've got a few questions in the chat.
I like this first one that talks about, is now a good time to look at repositioning or is there too much risk? Can I take that one first? Because I got opinions about that.
Of course, yeah, sure.
So, as the positioning expert, I've got a lot of questions about that. So there's a few things. One is, right in March, when we first went into lockdown, I got a lot of questions from people saying, we think that our market's really changed, but we don't know if this is a blip or if this is going to be a longer term change. So we don't know if we should dramatically shift our positioning or not. And the answer I gave to those companies that came to me and asked me that was, what matters is the time horizon for your buyers. So what we saw even back in March, some businesses were treating this as a short-term thing. So they were like, look, we own a sports stadium and sports stadium's closed right now, but we do believe we're going to go back to having things in sports stadiums. We don't know when. And so we're just hitting the pause button right now here and nothing's really going to change. Other types of businesses, even back in March, were like, No, this dramatically changes our business. We're actually doing a reorg right now. We're deploying money differently, and those changes are going to roll out over a year. And so in those cases where your customer are making big shifts in priority that are, with a year to a 2-year time horizon, I think you absolutely need to reposition in response. So in the companies that came to me, and I've done a lot of repositioning work with companies where the priorities shifted, their customers' priorities shifted, and they shifted in a way that they expect to be long-term. And the companies reacted very quickly by doing a shift in their own positioning, and that's worked out really great for them. I've had others where their customers on hold, and they're a little bit on hold too, waiting to see what the actual priority shift is going to be when it happens. One good way to measure this, and I am a super big fan of customer advisory boards. What something like Corona teaches us is that it is a very good thing to have a group of customers that you can tap at a moment's notice when something big and unexpected happens, and go in and have a big dialogue two-way about how does this impact your priorities, what's going on right now, how is everything different. The companies I know that had active customer advisory boards were able to react very quickly. The ones that didn't were a little bit slower because they had to figure out how to open those lines of communications in a situation where a lot of people just weren't taking their calls. I don't know if that answered, but hopefully that answers.
Sure. Bella had another question relating to COVID as well. Do you think it's even more challenging to become a priority during COVID, which I think you've addressed somewhat?
Well, yeah, and yes and no. So one thing I will tell you, and this was more true back in March, and then we'll see how it goes as time goes on. But one thing that we've learned, and if you're old like me, you've learned because you've been through a bunch of these market crash situations, like when the economy gets uncertain, sometimes what you have is your value propositions for your stuff are really oriented, like in B2B, we really only have two value propositions. We're either helping companies make money or we're helping companies save money. That's it. That's all we've got. Like we might talk about, oh, it saves you time, but why do you care about saving time? It's because you're going to either make more money or save some money. It's all we got. Makes money, saves money. That's it. We only have two things if we're selling to businesses. In periods of economic growth, when the economy is really good, a value proposition of makes money always wins over a saves money, because it just seems like we're all growing, companies are growing, we're going to help you make money. When the economy is bad, saves money wins. It flips. And so you could see it right away. The minute that we went into lockdown and it was like, oh my God, COVID is actually going to have a big impact on us. There are companies whose priorities shifted on a dime from grow to cash preservation. So if you have a product where your value proposition was strongly oriented around, we're going to help you save money, we're going to help you be more efficient, we're going to help you do more with less, then I would say like April, May, June, that was a super high priority thing for many companies. And so being able to tap into that, I think, did make you a very high priority, because companies were doing all kinds of things that were super high priority because the goal right now is to conserve cash. So I think companies are still doing stuff. They still have a set of priorities. It's just the priorities, I think, for a lot of companies are different than what they were 6 months ago. 6 months ago, they had priorities more oriented around growth. Right now, a lot of companies have a priority more oriented around cash preservation, finding efficiencies, doing more with less.
Yeah, 100%. I think that's across industries, across countries, continents, definitely. Amy had a question. How do you position when you have a new product that is MVP and has basic features?
Yeah, so I've got a point of view on this. So in my methodology, right, if you look at how I do positioning, it starts with this idea of, well, if you didn't exist, what would you do? And what are the alternatives to what you do? when you're just starting out and you have a product that hasn't launched yet, or you're just about to launch, what you have is a positioning thesis. So you're basically saying, I built this product. I did hopefully customer discovery interviews. And what came out of that is I'm like, okay, I think I compete with this. I think I'm different in this way. This is the value I deliver for customers. These are the people that are going to love me. So you have this thesis. But in my experience, having done a whole lot of startups and launched a whole lot of products, generally our thesis is kind of wrong. Like, hopefully it's not completely wrong, but it's usually like we don't get it spot on. So some of the assumptions baked into that thesis are incorrect, and we literally cannot know until we get the product in people's hands. So in the early days of a product where it's just an MVP, I think you basically you need to position it. The positioning is going to be based on your thesis, but I would advise you to keep the positioning a little bit loose, because you don't know exactly where it's going to go, and you can tighten it up later once you have a good feeling about who loves your stuff and why. So my goofy analogy for this is, let's say you made a fishing net, and you think your fishing net is really good for tuna. You could position it and say, I got the world's greatest tuna fishing net. Maybe it works, maybe it doesn't. But, and a smarter way to do it might be, you know what I got? I got a fishing net. It's for big fish, all kinds of big fish. And then let's take it out to the part of the ocean and see what we pull up. Maybe what we pull up is a bunch of grouper, and then we're like, haha, it's actually not a tuna fishing net, really, or maybe it's good for tuna too. But let's call it a grouper fishing net for now, because it's really good for that. So I wouldn't be afraid to keep the positioning a little bit loose when you're still at the MVP stage.
Sure, and then you can develop the positioning alongside the product.
Once you see the patterns and who loves your stuff and why, then you can really tighten it up and run at it.
Sure. There is another question from Julian, which is, why do you think so many people confuse positioning for messaging and vice versa?
Oh, I'm glad you asked that, Julian. So I'll tell you why. I know exactly why. Because positioning, people have, I think, started to confuse positioning with the way we communicate positioning. So I need to construct messaging. Great. I'm going to go write some messaging. Who's the message for? Who do we compete with, and why do we beat them? What's our value proposition? I literally can't build messaging until I'm clear on that stuff. And I cannot get clear on that stuff by writing about it. That's the tail wagging the dog. Like, I get a lot of people tell me, well, we're going to do a storytelling exercise, and that's going to figure out our messaging. Well, who's the hero of your story? How do you write a story without knowing what the goals of the hero are and all this sort of stuff? What is the struggle for the hero? What is the transformation that the hero undergoes? Like, we cannot storytell our way into positioning. We can't. It's like saying your product doesn't matter. Like, we're product marketers. We should deeply understand that product matters. This stuff doesn't come from thin air. So where it comes from is, people are buying your stuff today, and they're buying it by comparing it to other ways of accomplishing the same goal. And so they're either in that status quo or other competitors. You need to understand what makes you different and a better way of reaching that goal. And then we got to understand who cares about that. And we can't do messaging or branding or storytelling or any of that stuff until we figure that out first. Like, positioning is actually the strategic underpinning of all that stuff. But we have been taught in marketing school that we can do positioning by filling out a positioning statement, which is nonsense. That's nonsense. Like, every product I've ever worked on could be positioned in multiple different market categories. Email and chat are the same damn thing. We just have different assumptions about them. They're 99% feature overlapping. But if I say I'm email, then you better have a calendar. You better have a spam filter. I don't care about either of those things with chat, right? So how I position a thing matters. Doing a positioning statement doesn't tell me which one of those market categories is better for my product. So positioning is a thing. I got to do this first before I can figure out how to tell the story, before I can figure out how to communicate the message, before I can even build my go-to-market strategy. It's like, who am I trying to go after here? And when I get them, what do I say? So I kind of got to have the positioning first before I can tackle any of those things. I blame the positioning statement for why people confuse messaging and positioning. And then I blame all these people that have storytelling frameworks, which are amazing. They're just not the same thing as positioning. We tell stories that embody our positioning, but I cannot figure out what the positioning is by making up a story that I'm just making it up. I actually need to have the positioning first. Then I'm going to figure out the best way to communicate that positioning once I've got it.
And there's another question to do with what you tie positioning with, so not just messaging as well, but should we think of positioning together with pricing as a combination in our conversations?
Well, this is the thing about positioning, right? A shift in positioning. Let's take my robot example. Let's say you're the team there, and you were positioning as a robot. Now I'm positioning it as a self-driving car. Like, is that just a change in messaging? No. It's absolutely going to change the product roadmap, and it potentially has a giant impact on pricing. It potentially has a giant impact on how you sell the product. So a shift in positioning can almost be seen as like a shift in business strategy. So in the work that I do with companies, when we're looking at the positioning to potentially shift it, this is not a conversation that's happening in the marketing department in isolation. We do this with the CEO, the head of sales, the head of marketing, the head of customer success, the head of product, and we're all getting together, and we got to all be on board and aligned on the new positioning, because we all got to go and execute on it. It's not just messaging. So pricing, as well as the product roadmap and all kinds of other stuff, it is impacted by a shift in positioning. So you have to think about all these things together.
Yeah, take more of a wholesome approach. I think there's one more question, and then we'll wrap things up. It's from Andre, who says, can you give us some examples of questions to get the true priority from our customers?
To get what the key priorities are, like for that last bit, like where the priorities. Yeah. So we used to do this, like in all the companies I worked at, we always had a customer advisory board, because I'm like, once you've had a customer advisory board, you realize customer advisory boards are like a magic thing, and you'll never work at a company that doesn't have one again. So I would do this in the customer advisory board meetings to check in on what's going on. So I get my customer advisory board around, and I'd be like, what's your top three? Most big companies will have top 1, 2, 3 priorities. Even smaller companies, particular departments, will have priorities for the quarter or for the year. And so we'd have a conversation about what those priorities are, and then do some deep thinking about how do those priorities align with what we do, or how should we be aligning with what those priorities are. So the priorities tend to be like, there's nowhere else to get these other than from having good conversations with customers about what exactly are those, what are they focused on this year? What are the big things for this year?
Yeah, sure. Awesome. Thank you so much, April. Great session today. And if you had a question to ask, but maybe didn't get around to asking it, we have another session with April coming up in October.
Oh yeah, that's right. We're doing the big Q&A thing.
The big Q&A. So any more questions you have, I see some people asking some now. We have a whole nother session in the beginning of October. April's book is also awesome. Obviously awesome. It's called
Obviously. Awesome.
Go get it. Thanks once again, April. Thank you to everyone tuning in. Hope to see you all soon. And April, hope to speak to you soon as well. Bye-bye. Thank you, everyone.
Great. Thanks everybody for coming. Talk to you later.